All right, everybody, let's get started. I am so delighted to be bringing you this topic because it is such a hot topic. I posted something about this topic, how to be manipulative, on TikTok, and it got a lot of views and a lot of conversation. I posted something on Instagram, a similar response, a lot of conversation, a lot of responses, some of them not that nice. One person responded and just said psycho. And I love that. And I welcome that because I totally understand it. That word, this word, manipulate, being manipulative, is a word that sometimes gets a bad rap. And I can understand if I were to go around and tell people to be manipulative, how some people might think that it is psycho. So, first, I want to talk about what I'm saying when I say I'm going to teach you how to be manipulative. As you know, those of you that are members of the Belief Builders Academy or have been following me for a long time, I love words. And I think it's really important that we know what a word means and where it comes from and what the root is, because words are magic. And if we use them well, we can take on their magic and we can use them to create magic. And so the word manipulate, I looked up the root of that word and we can get into it all, but man is hand. That man is hand. So it's manipulate is to handle skillfully. That is the root of the word manipulate. And so I think it is completely appropriate to want to be able to handle things and people and situations skillfully. That is the work that we do in the Belief Builders Academy. We are trying to build beliefs and handle people and situations and events skillfully so that we can build our own beliefs around those situation, events, and people. And so that we can then build others' beliefs, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, bosses, those that we lead, clients, prospects, whoever it may be. We want to be able to handle them skillfully. And when people think this is a bad thing, I just want to kind of come back to this idea of handle skillfully. I read a book recently by Matthew Hussey. I had heard him on a number of podcasts, and the book is called Love Life. And it's a book about finding your love and finding relationships, romantic relationships. But I think that the title itself is a little bit of a play on words because I think it's also about love life. So love can be a verb, love life, or it can be an adjective, love life. And I think he meant it both ways. The way that he writes this book, it's a lot about who you are in the world and not just about attracting a partner. But in part of the book, he talked about rather than looking for someone who is 6'2", finance, blue eyes, which is popular right now, or someone who has a certain job or lives a certain place, he talks about the importance of finding someone who can handle you. And that resonated with me so thoroughly because I am currently dating. But when I look back on all of the relationships I've had, I had one relationship that was a 6-year relationship. We are very good friends to this day. And he handled me well. And that did not mean that it was nasty or bad, but he manipulated me well. He handled me skillfully. I can tend to be an introvert. In these situations, I put all my energy here. But then when situations like this are done, I often need some downtime and some quiet time. And we were together in law school and after law school, and I would be on for a period of time in law school, but then I wouldn't want to go out at night. And he knew when to push to go out and he knew when to honor my wishes to stay in. And when he was going to push me to go out, he did so very skillfully. He would not complain or whine or make fun of me or cajole me or try to make me feel bad. He would just play music that he knew I liked, and he would start dancing around and being goofy and making me laugh. And the combination of all of those things would often get me motivated on my own to want to go out. He handled me skillfully. And in that book, when that Matt Hussey said, you want to find someone who can handle you, he immediately came to mind because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who can handle me, and I'm looking for someone that I can handle, that I know when to cajole them and joke with them, and I know when to keep quiet. I know when they need words of affirmation, and I know when they need words that say, I understand, and that sucks. That is manipulative. It is handling skillfully. And that is what we want to be. I think the big pushback on being manipulative is people are afraid of the intention. And it all comes down to intention. You know, Oprah was so big on intention, and I've been listening to some recent podcasts where she was the guest, and she has talked about one particular episode that they did, and it was similar to what we think of in like Maury Povich or all of those talk shows back in the day that were very salacious. And they had one episode like that of the Oprah show, where a man came on with his wife and his mistress, and on air he announced that his mistress, to his wife, that his mistress was pregnant, and the wife didn't know. And Oprah was mortified and very upset. And she decided that they weren't going to do that anymore, and that she needed to be very clear on the intention of her episodes, of her shows, of their topics moving forward. And I think that if you want to be the good kind of manipulative, you have to be clear on your intention. And the other piece of this, so is it your intention to hurt people? Is it your intention to lie, to steal, to take advantage of someone? Then that is the bad kind of manipulative. But if it is your intention to build someone's belief, to help them, to get to a place where you're helping each other, to help them to see things differently, to get them something as well, to create a shared mind, all of those things are a very different intention, and they create a very different energy. And energy is part of being manipulative that we're going to get to in a minute. But before we get there, I just want to be clear. For those of you that are bristling at this topic, how to be manipulative, all of your defenses are up like a porcupine. I get it. Message me, reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss it. But what I know for sure is that some people with bad intent are very good at being manipulative. Some people with bad intent are very good at handling people. And my wish, and the reason I'm sharing these tools, is because I want people with good intent to have the same skills. These skills are very similar to skills I have discussed before. They are the skills of advocating. They are the skills of building belief, but there's just a little bit of a twist on them, and that's what we're going to go through here. The first step is always, so you want to know why you are manipulating, why you are being manipulative, because that's going to help you with your intent. That's the first step. Why? What is it that I want to accomplish here? That's going to get you to your intent. If you have a bad intent, an evil intent, I wish you well, but turn this off. If you are in a positive intent, often the next question that people want to go to is the how. How do I do it? Tell me how. That's what I'm here for, Heather. That's the title of this thing, for gosh sakes. How to be manipulative. Bring it on. We're not starting with the how. We're always starting with the who, because the who impacts the how. The who is everything for the how. Just as I've said to you time and time again, and in the Belief Builders Academy, there are courses on advocating that have a lot on this topic. It is to know your jury. If you want to manipulate someone, and that someone is a 14-year-old girl, you are going to handle that person skillfully and differently than if it was a 75-year-old man. You are going to handle a juror who is crying and heartbroken different than someone who is on cloud nine. You are going to manipulate a jury full of CEOs very differently than you would a jury full of people who are in prison. You have got to know your jury before we move on to anything else. And you've got to really know them. You know, in the courtroom, I only got to know so much about my jury. The way that it worked in Philadelphia, which is where I practiced most often, was we picked juries on Fridays. And judges wouldn't want you to know this, but the truth is they're often not there. They often take Fridays off, and they send their court officers, not all judges, I don't want anyone listening to get upset, some judges send their court officer to run the practice of jury selection. And the court officer often wants to get home early on a Friday. And so this process was often quite abbreviated. In other jurisdictions, it was very different, but this is how I practiced. And so we would get the jury questionnaire that they filled out, and that would give us some good jury information. What part of the city did they live? That would tell me a lot about the person. How old were they? Where did they work? Male or female? What was their race? What was their ethnicity? What was their gender identification? What was their sexual identification? And then it would ask for criminal reasons, for reasons for criminal court, which is not what I did, but they had the same questionnaire. Things like, would you be more likely to believe a cop, a policeman, who testified simply because they were a policeman? Very interesting information for me, even in a civil case. That's a specific type of juror if they're more likely to believe a police officer. Questions like, have you ever committed a crime? Then there were also questions that were specific to me. In my cases, do you work at a hospital? Does anyone in your family work at a hospital? Have you ever been hurt at a hospital? All those types of questions. And then we also had the opportunity to talk to the jurors for a very short time to sort of get a sense, and really the sense that we were supposed to be trying to get was whether or not the juror could be fair. Because if a juror can't be fair, if the juror said, I hate doctors and my mother died at the hands as a result of medical malpractice, that juror would likely be stricken by both sides because they probably couldn't be fair. But there are other situations where I might say this juror can't be fair. The other side would say they could. We'd fight back, and then I would take one of my strikes that I'm allowed in the process. But through the process, I got to know my jury. I got to understand them a little. And when we got to actually talk to them, I could make eye contact. I could read their energy. We could talk a little bit about, oh, what are you reading? If they came in with a book. And I would note all of the things about each juror that ultimately ended up on my jury so that I could speak to them, so that I could handle them and the trial skillfully, so that I could manipulate. And so you want to do the same, and you have much more time most of the time. If your jury is, if you're manipulating your kids to go to bed or to eat their broccoli, you know your kids. You know their pain. You know what they like. You know what they believe. You know what they're afraid of. You know what they love. You know what lights them up. And then you can speak to those things if you're trying to handle them skillfully. You can say something like, if you eat your broccoli, you can have a brownie if you know that's their favorite thing. If you know they like to be dared to do things, you can dare them to eat their broccoli, knowing your jury. You can, if it's your boss and you know your boss, you can know my boss is really worried about having to take more time out of their day to accomplish this particular project. So if you know that and you want to be part of that project, you want to lead that project, you manipulate them by talking about all of the ways that you can decrease the time sacrifice that this project will be for your boss. You are manipulating because you know your jury. In my cases, in my courtroom, when I was talking to the jury, I knew that my jury, and I know this of all juries, I have so much respect for jurors because ultimately at the beginning of a trial, they make a vow, and part of that vow is they will well and truly try the case. And I know that my jurors took that vow very seriously. And I knew that I could help them to do that. And so that is part of what I wanted them to know as we went through the process. I am here to help you fulfill that oath. And that is one of the ways that I manipulated the jury. I handled them skillfully in order to build their beliefs, ask for what I want, and get it. That is manipulation. So the first step is for you to know your jury. Who are they? And know them as well as you can. Take the time to understand them, their beliefs, their perspectives. You cannot change someone's perspective until you understand theirs. You cannot build someone's belief until you understand theirs. So dive deep into knowing your jury before you get to the how. Once you know your jury, it's a whole lot easier to get to the how. And this is the C process, S-E-E. The S is stories. Stories are a way to manipulate. They are a way to handle skillfully. Human beings love stories. We are drawn to stories. Stories work for our brain, but different stories resonate with different people, different juries. Let me give you a great example that happened recently. As many of you know, I am getting certified in hypnosis in large part because of the impact it has had on my life. I lost 100 pounds when I was 19, thanks to hypnosis. I believe that the reason I've been able to maintain that loss, which is actually harder, the research shows, than taking it off, is because of the hypnosis. It has been life-changing for me. My father is aware of that. My father was there when I lost the weight. He knew I went to hypnosis. He's super supportive, totally lovely about it. And not that impressed by hypnosis. I think my father believes that I did it and that I could have done it without the hypnosis. I think he has a lot of belief in me, which is lovely. I also used hypnosis. Both my mentor had a heart attack in the courtroom, and then years later, my then fiance had a heart attack when we were at the shore. And the combination of those two things, plus all of these years of defending doctors in medical malpractice cases, made me very anxious around health issues. Not so much mine, although mine too, but also other people's. So if someone was with me and they had a stomach ache, I'd say, we've got to go to the hospital. It could be something bananas. When my sister delivered her babies, I was there, not in the room, but in the waiting room. And even after she had delivered, I had had a case with an amniotic fluid embolism. So I was still pacing the waiting room, worried about an amniotic fluid embolism. And it was getting, after the heart attacks, it got to the point where it was disrupting my daily life. And I used hypnosis for that, and it was enormously helpful. I also know that when we are advocating, when we are building beliefs, the tools of a hypnotist can help us. And so for all of these reasons, I decided to get certified. And my dad knew that I was getting certified, and he was fine with it, didn't really say much. And then the woman I'm getting certified with is Grace Smith. And she shared on Instagram a video of a golfer named Cam Davis. Cam Davis had gone through a slump in golfing. He had not been golfing well at all, and in fact hadn't even made many tournaments and had not done particularly well in the tournaments that he had made. And then he won, and it happened to be while I was home visiting my parents. He won this big tournament, and Grace shared a news conference that he did. And in the news conference, the reporters were asking him, what do you attribute this to, Cam? You won this big tournament. It came out of nowhere. What happened? And he said, about 2 weeks ago, I started doing hypnosis with Grace, and everything has changed for me. And so I shared this with my father. That story about Cam Davis had much more of an impact on my father than my story did. And this is not a bad thing for my father. I think my father believed that I did that myself so many years ago, but he believed that Cam Davis was impacted by hypnosis. And now his belief in my certification, his belief in my decision, his belief in hypnosis has been built because that story resonated with him. So you want to be a good storyteller, yes. And a lot of the skills that we're going to be continuing to talk about here in the Belief Builders Academy moving forward are going to be specific to storytelling. It is a very specific skill that not a lot of us know. And it's important to note that you have to know your jury when you're telling the story. Which story is going to resonate most? If we stick with this hypnosis idea, right around the time that I was deciding to get certified, I did a poll in my Instagram and said, are you open to hypnosis? And like 97% of people said yes. A few people said no. And one of the people that said no is a physician that I know. And so then I started to think about, I haven't talked to her about this, but I started to think about how I could build her belief in hypnosis. And one of my favorite studies about hypnosis is done by Dr. Daniel Spiegel at Stanford. And he talks about hypnosis for women who experienced breast cancer. And they did a study and they compared a group who had hypnosis and a group who didn't. And the group who had hypnosis had less pain, less anxiety, etc. That story may be more likely to resonate with that doctor than the story of Cam Davis and golfing or the story of Heather Hansen and her weight loss. And so you've got to know the story that you want to tell based on your jury. Now, some of you are manipulating a group like I was in front of my juries. If it's just one person, you can get to know that person and you can tell the story that resonates with that person. But if you have a group of people, you want to do one of two things. You want to either know each of them well enough to know what kind of stories they all want to hear, and then tell the stories that they want and need to hear. Or you can sort of generalize and recognize that there are so many ways to tell stories. You can tell stories in a pure storytelling format. You can tell stories with numbers, with graphs, with pictures. There's millions of ways to communicate a story. And so you can do it. You can tell the story of the breast cancer study and Cam Davis and Heather Hansen and a million other things that have happened as a result of hypnosis. And it can be very, very powerful. So the S is stories, keeping your jury in mind. And then the first E is evidence. And evidence, you guys know, I'm obsessed with evidence. It is everywhere. And if you have a story, you want to collect and create evidence that support that story. So it could be something like Cam Davis, and then go back and get the evidence. For 2 years, he played X number of tournaments and lost this number of times with this big of a loss and didn't make this many tournaments. And then this time with this much hypnosis, he made this tournament. That's all evidence to support the story. There's also evidence you might look to say what other golfers have used hypnosis in the past. Or evidence, I happen to know because Grace is a friend of mine, that tons of golfers are reaching out to her to get hypnosis. So it's evidence that other golfers now believe that this may be worthwhile. That may be influential, persuasive to your jury. So you want to collect and create the evidence, not the evidence that resonates with you, the evidence that resonates with your jury. And it might be very different evidence. But when you are handling people skillfully, when you are manipulating people, you are thinking of it from their perspective. You are getting into their brains, their bodies, their wants, their pains, their passions, their excitements, their beliefs, and collecting and creating evidence that speak to those. It's so important. Another example of this, and I'm sticking to the hypnosis example because I'm so entrenched in hypnosis right now. I'm reading 4 books I've read on hypnosis, classes, all the things. But another piece of evidence, and this is a great example, a piece of evidence that we are taught to share in our hypnosis classes is this. There is a study that shows that normal therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, it took 600 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy in this study for people to feel a 38% improvement in what it was they were trying to improve. On the other hand, it took 6 sessions of hypnosis for the researchers to feel, the people being researched, to feel a 93% improvement in the thing that they were going for. Now that is strong evidence for some. For me, I share that because it's a real study and it's real research and it was really done. However, it's a little bit of a flawed study in the way it was carried out, and I'm not going to dive deep into that piece of it because it's not worth our time. In my opinion, it's not the most well done study, and it was a long time ago. And so for me, that piece of evidence isn't as strong as it might be for someone else. I tend to cross-examine things like that in my head. And if someone were to share that piece of evidence with me and that was all they said, I would want to Google it myself because I used to date a guy who used to say this and it drove me nuts, but I would be thinking the same thing. That doesn't sound right to me. And so I would want to look it up. And if I looked it up and saw that the study was not, in my mind, it was a little bit flawed, that would actually lose credibility for me. So you've got to know your jury, and you've got to be aware if you're talking to someone who's a cross-examiner like I am, and I'm not proud of it. I wish I was a little bit more accepting. I wish I was a little bit less suspicious. One of the things it's a double-edged sword, but one of the things I wish I were is a little less suspicious. But if you are dealing with a suspicious jury, Be careful about the evidence that you share. Make sure it's well-grounded. Give it a situation that you can challenge your jury to say, check on it. Go ahead, read the study. Look at the story. Check Grace's Instagram. If you don't believe me, go ahead, look it up. You want to know your jury well enough to be able to handle them skillfully and be anticipating their areas of resistance. Resistance is an opportunity to actually build credibility, but only if you know that your jury is a person who's going to, or people who are going to have that resistance. So we've got know your jury, and then we've got the C formula: stories, evidence, and one more thing about evidence that I don't want to forget to say. Some of the greatest pieces of evidence when you are trying to manipulate someone and being manipulative and handle them skillfully is creating advocates, getting people around you who are supporting your story, who are telling your story for you when you're not in the room, who are sharing your evidence for you when you're not in the room. And people who know how to do that and want to do that and are ready to do that, they are phenomenal pieces of evidence, especially if those advocates are people that your jury likes and respects and believes. So that's an important piece of evidence. So stories, evidence, and then energy. When you are manipulating, it comes back to the intention. If I am manipulating you out of anger, you will feel that energy and I will not be able to manipulate you. If I am manipulating out of frustration, resentment, eventually energy doesn't lie and people do feel it. So you want to be manipulating out of delight, out of philanthropy, out of generosity, out of pleasure, out of goodness, out of compassion, out of curiosity, all of the wonderful things that we want good manipulators to be, rather than evil, bad, angry, selfish, all of the other things. We want our manipulators to be generous, kind, compassionate, giving, good, delighted, relaxed. Those energies are going to make you so much better at manipulating. But also, it's important to know that you have to match the energy of the jury. So for example, and a great example, in my cases, and one of the things that I love so much about my work now is I get to be happy. I get to be delighted. Whereas in the courtroom, I might be, in my early days, especially of trying cases, I was delighted to be there. I was stressed, I was nervous, I took it seriously, but I was delighted. I loved my job. I loved the opportunity to help the jury understand, to help them well and truly try the case, and to slay the energy of confusion, which is the way I like to think about it. I was delighted, but I could not manipulate the jury with an energy of delight in cases where there were catastrophic injuries. It just didn't fit. My jury, if it was a catastrophic injury and the patient on the other side was paralyzed or dead, I mean, these are terrible things, but they were my daily work. I was not going to go into that room delighted. I had to match the jury's energy. I was serious. I was thoughtful. I had gravitas. I was elegant, for sure. I worked on that. I was compassionate. I was calm. And I wanted to match the jury's energy. And it's really helpful if you learn to do that too when you are being manipulative, when you are handling people skillfully. I'll go back to that boyfriend of mine in law school. If I was exhausted in the bed after taking the bar, and it's a great example because after taking, so bars, we take the bar exam. Leading up to the bar exam, I was fine. My roommate was puking every day in like the week leading up to the bar exam. My boyfriend was having a very difficult time, super nervous, like very on edge, would snap at. I was fine, totally myself. The minute the bar exam was done, I broke down. I was on the bed sobbing. If my boyfriend had tried to play music that I liked and act goofy, he would not have been matching my energy. He didn't even try to get me to go out. He knew how to handle me skillfully. He went out because I told him to, and he knew that I was not lying and I didn't need him there and I just needed time to decompress. He handled me skillfully. and he matched my energy. He was excited. He was hyper. He was delighted that the thing was over, but he wasn't running around the room like having a party while I was sobbing. He matched my energy. He manipulated me, and it was beautiful. It was loving. It was kind. And you've got to learn to match the energy of your jury too, if you want to be a good manipulator, if you want to be manipulative. That is the sum of how to be manipulative. Now, of course, each of these topics has its own subtopics. We've talked here in the membership about evidence a lot, and there's going to be more on evidence in the coming months and years, to be honest. It's always growing and changing, and I'm always learning and reading and going to courses about this. We will be talking more about knowing your jury. We will be talking more, as always, about energy. But another thing that we're going to be talking about, and depending on what you guys vote on, next month's topic may be how to know when you're being manipulated. Because some people with bad intent are very good at manipulating. And I actually wrote a Newsweek article about Elizabeth Holmes when the Theranos thing came about. She's the woman who is in jail right now for having defrauded all of those investors around Theranos. She manipulated people, and she did so in a way that was ultimately of bad intent. And though she would probably still argue that she didn't have bad intent, but you want to know when you're being manipulated. When I looked at her situation, it was very clear to me that the people who were investing were allowing themselves to be manipulated. So that's going to be a future topic if that's something that you're interested in. But for today, what I really want you to remember is know your jury. Who first? And then the how is stories, evidence, and energy.
Okay, Elegant Warriors, that was just a small sample of what we do in the Belief Builders Academy. That is my membership where I share the tools to build beliefs. We start with your beliefs, your belief in yourself and your potential and your value and your worth. And then we move on to others' beliefs, whether it be your bosses or investors or clients or customers or friends or family or students or patients. Whoever it is that you have a belief that you want to build, that's the work that we do. Currently, it is through coaching, masterclasses, and a beautiful community where we talk to one another. And starting in October, it's going to include hypnosis as well. If you want to know when the doors to that new opening, that new offering open, you want to get on my email list. And that means that you want to sign up for the wait list in the show notes. In the show notes, you will see a wait list for the Belief Builders Academy, and you will be the first to hear when that academy is going to reopen. It is month to month, so you don't have to commit. You can come in and try it out, but most people don't leave. Just warning you now. I would love to see your name on that list. I would love to see you in the Belief Builders Academy, so I hope that you take this time to sign up for the wait list. No matter what, I hope that you have a great week and that you take good care.